Pittsburgh Steeler fans, it is time once again for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. It is the night before the draft. Once again, my name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, joined as always by one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's NFL Christmas Eve, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited to get this draft season over with. Like all the speculation done and actually knowing who we got.
And you know what I'm excited for is our special guest tonight, Mr. Brian Batko from the Post-Gazette. Brian, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great. I agree with you there, Geoffrey. I'm excited for the draft to start. Also a little bit excited for it to be over just because, there's literally hundreds of guys that you're trying to learn about and research, and the Steelers end up with, 8 of them? So, it's a little bit of a slog as far as that goes. But, excited to talk some ball with you guys, and it's cool to be here with you. I'm usually out there in the mainstream media on the radio stations, or we're doing our podcast at the Post-Gazette. So thanks for having me.
Oh, it really is our pleasure. And it's funny that you mentioned those hundreds of guys that we research. And when you look at this process, as soon as the Steelers were bounced from the playoffs, you saw probably 20 mock drafts come out with 20 different prospects. You look today, 20 different mock drafts come out. Again, it feels like 20 different prospects. Brian, I guess my question to you here is, do you see any more clarity at this point, less than 24 hours to the draft than we did, say, 2 months ago?
I don't know about clarity because, I feel like it's always, you're trying to gather the intel, what you're hearing, but I don't know that this is my third year on the beat covering the team. So in all honesty, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I just don't know that the Steelers and the decision makers within the organization are really saying much to people outside of those walls, because why would you? I mean, what benefit is there for you to give any indication of tipping your hand? Now, like I think back to 2 years ago, the first draft I covered, everybody kind of knew they wanted Devin Bush and they were going to be willing to move up to do that if they had to. Was that sourcing, or was that just kind of common sense when you look at the roster, right? So I think it's kind of trending that way right now with running backs, and especially Najee Harris. But you're right, Michael. I mean, there's so many different choices for the Steelers out there. If you want to Google any name in Steelers, you'll probably find somebody mocking that player to them. When you factor in even the wildest scenarios like quarterbacks and things of that nature, I think you could literally probably find 32 different players or something like that to actually have someone predict the Steelers to pick at 24.
With this season, as different as the 2020 college season was, and as changed as this season has been with COVID-19, how different has the draft process been, like even for you just covering the draft and what you've been able to see compared to the previous years you've covered it?
Yeah, you feel a lot more removed from it because, 2 years ago, the Devin Bush draft, I had just joined the Steelers beat at the Post-Gazette with Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldo. So I was kind of trying to get caught up on a lot of the draft coverage while also still just kind of learning my way around covering the team in the NFL. But last year was great because I got to go out to the Combine in Indianapolis with Jerry Dulac, and I really enjoyed that because I am kind of a draft nerd. I've always loved it going back to when I was younger, following the sport. And, I even like the NBA draft a whole lot. So I'm into that portion of the offseason. I know not every NFL reporter is like that. Some people kind of get fatigued by it. Maybe I will if I'm still doing this in 5 to 10 years. But this year's, it's definitely been weird and different because you didn't have that gathering ground at Lucas Oil Stadium to kind of mainly put names to faces and stuff like that with the players. It was cool to actually get a chance to interview guys at the podium in person, and you get a sense for, wow, this is a really likable player, and whoever gets him is going to be lucky to at least have the person, if not the prospect when it comes to all the physical traits. So didn't get as much of that this year, which was kind of unfortunate, but I've tried to watch a lot of these players on their pro day interviews and stuff like that on Zoom. And at least for the local program here in Pittsburgh, I was able to get on the Zoom calls to interview those players live after their pro day. So that's been kind of the whole exposure, though, and that's made it a little bit of a different or odd kind of draft season.
Now, before we go any further, I do want to ask you about your Twitter post today, Brian, with one Mr. Kyle Pitts.
Going
of course,
viral, Michael.
Yeah, it definitely going viral. There's a ton of conversation around that. Of course, we know he's not going to fall to 24, but it's just funny to me the amount of outcry, and I'm curious what you think of like all these people taking it seriously. The Kyle Pittsburgh post.
It's so stupid. Like it's a great example of how goofy people get like this time of year and on edge you are. Like, the night before the draft, you think any like tongue-in-cheek tweet that you see from someone, especially, with the blue check mark like I have, which a lot of people are dunking on me for that if they thought I was serious. So I've gotten, my phone's just been blowing up over something that silly. I've gotten an email about it. Someone direct messaged me with some not very kind words. So I would just say I thought it was pretty obvious there that I was joking, but maybe it's like the player that I chose, which I mainly did because his name is Pitts. And he's like a guy that a whole bunch of fan bases think in real life tomorrow night will fall to them under some pipe dream scenario, or maybe it's how I worded it. But it's been pretty bizarre to see just how many people are mad at me, but they also agree with me, guys. If he was there at 24, you absolutely would not be passing on him if you're the Steelers. I think it's a pretty uncontroversial take as far as I'm concerned.
You were talking about people falling, and this year to me, I look at it and sometimes I'm thinking like, do we really know as much as we think we know? Like it's come down to where you see a lot of mock drafts where they're all trending in like very tight range like we normally see. And sometimes I think it's even more like people are more certain they know what the picks are this year than even previous years. And yet we know so much less than from, the team side. We have much less interaction. Are you expecting there to be more surprises in this draft? Or do you think with all the, everyone being online that we kind of have more of an advantage on the teams than maybe we do on other years?
No, I guess I'm expecting the surprises, really, but like kind of what we were talking about at the top here, while there is a lot of groupthink that goes along with this, obviously, I mean, you get a Mel Kiper mock or a Todd McShay mock, and you're naturally your opinions are going to be colored by that a little bit when the next draft analyst goes and does his. So like there is some consensus forming, but now you've got so many experts and analysts and and I don't say that, ironically, like these people do study the film and the draft prospects far more than I do when I have to worry about the Steelers where, a lot of the pundits and talking heads out here, they're worrying about the entire league and all the guys who are going to end up across all 32 teams. So there's so many of those draft experts now, I think that you are getting the more wide range of outcomes. Like, Chris Sims is a guy that I actually really like his opinions generally. And I think he has a pretty darn impressive track record, at least predicting quarterback success. Like he has Justin Fields falling to 32 for the Bucs. Like that's even more bizarre maybe than my joking Kyle Pitts tweet today. And yet it's one take that's out there. So, I did a best case and worst case mock draft of the first round for the Steelers on the Post-Gazette website yesterday, and I counted them up. I think I had 14 of the guys going in the top 23 picks in both scenarios, and then total, I think I had 32 guys who could be picked in the top 23 before the Steelers are on the clock. So, are some of those more realistic than others for sure, but it goes to show that there is a lot of variance, and this is the time of the pre-draft process that you see these stories that are like, here's 5 or 6 guys who could sneak into the end of the first round.
One of those names we've heard throughout this entire draft process, and of course is popular with a lot of fans, that being Najee Harris, that really has been around from the start of this process up until now. Do you think that name is a big of a lock if he's available at 24 as some fans think it is, or is that more of just a pipe dream to try to help fix the running game?
Yeah, I don't know that it's as much of a lock as it's maybe getting made out to be. Like, I think Travis Etienne has a lot of traits that, even if they're not things that the Steelers necessarily looked for in past running backs that they've drafted or at least drafted high, they've got a new OC coming in here, and we don't necessarily know how Matt Canada's outlook on things is going to shape this draft plan for them on the offensive side of the ball. So, while there are a ton of characteristics with Najee Harris that make you think he checks all the normal boxes for the Steelers, from height, weight, production, competition level of winning against that competition, of course, at Alabama, and even everything you hear about the football character and the personality from him, which I think, to touch on something we mentioned earlier, shines through when you listen to really any of these interviews with him. You're not there in the room, but you can tell how engaging he is. It seems like a guy basically that Mike Tomlin would really like, right? So it's not like that sort of thing is coming out of thin air. He also happens to be, probably the highest rated running back by most of the guys who really have watched every snap and know what they're talking about. So again, I think there's a chance that Travis Etienne could be the apple of their eye at the running back position, maybe even a dark horse like a Javonte Williams, but it makes a lot of sense why Najee Harris is the one getting all the buzz.
If the Steelers don't get an Etienne, a Javonte Williams, if they don't get Najee Harris, what is your opinion? Where is this team? Because there's a lot of fans sitting there saying, if we don't get one of those top running backs, then you might as well just cancel the season. We're just toast. There's nothing we can do. How do you view that? What happens if the Steelers don't get one of those guys?
I don't think it's the end of the world, especially since, they're looking at their roster, and as much as we study and follow this stuff year round, they know it a heck of a lot better than we do, right? So, maybe they do have a little bit more of a belief in some of the running backs lower down the board that they can also come in and be an upgrade over the current crop, or maybe they're sitting there thinking, hey, we're not ready to give up on Benny Snell just yet. 2020 wasn't great, but we still believe he can have some sort of a role. Or Anthony McFarland, who, he was a rookie that didn't get much of a shot, but Mike Tomlin always likes to talk about that second lap around the track for those guys, and he's reunited with someone who he had great success with calling plays in college, in Matt Canada. So again, I'm not banking on all those things being true, but to your question, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk that they're going to pick one of those three. I think there's some value later on in this running backs class. They're not in the same tier as Harris and Etienne especially, but Trey Sermon from Ohio State, if they think he's going to be there at 55 and they like him that much, then that changes things at 24. Or even somebody like Michael, I remember from talking to you last year this time, Chuba Hubbard. Could you imagine if they had the Canadian connection of Chase Claypool and Chuba Hubbard on their offense? That would just be a fun little story, but Hubbard's got some game too. There's a reason why he was so productive in his college career at Oklahoma State. So there are lower names on the board who, they're not going to be that splashy running back pick like those big three. But if they believe in Landon Dickerson and his health, he could be the guy at 24. They could think Creed Humphrey has no holes in his game, another center from Oklahoma. So there are different ways that this could go. And then, the other wild card is maybe they think Chuks Okorafor and Zach Banner should be competing for the right tackle job rather than, the former being the definite no-brainer guy at left tackle. And they want to find, the man at that position for the next 10 years. And they want to do it in the first round. That opens you up to 5, 6, 7 other prospects who could go there.
To get my my weekly Canadian content quota met,
I beat you to the punch.
You did, but I believe there's 7 total draft eligible Canadians in this draft. So I don't know. That's just one having there.
Yeah, they should trade away one of their picks so that then all 7 of them can just be the Steelers draft class this year.
It would make for some interesting content up north of the border up here. That's I think I'd be for it, but I think a lot of Steelers fans probably pretty against pretty much all 6th round talent, aside from Javon Holland. But speaking of positional holes for this team, in your opinion, rather, Brian, what spot is the biggest need for the Steelers? If they went away from best player available, what's the one spot they got to fill?
Yeah, I go back and forth between running back and center. I think I still lean running back just because, BJ Finney and JC Hassenauer, they are what they are. They're not very exciting, but they at least have a little bit more starting experience, not only in this league, but with this organization than all the names that you want to throw out at running back, whether it's Jalen Samuels, who, is like on the back of a milk carton after last season, or Benny Snell, or Kalen Ballage, who, some people raise their eyebrows when they signed him. I kind of think he's just the guy. Like, best case scenario would be, your number 2 back behind whomever you draft. So I think that's the biggest area where they need to improve and can improve with a rookie who's got some fresh legs and some juice and can kind of take your running game to another level. But again, center's a need as well. It's apples to apples, kind of comparing those two positions in your level of experience or your track record there. But it's those two for me. And then kind of the sneaky number 3 need, I guess it's not that sneaky now, would be cornerback, which I think they could address sooner rather than later and earlier than a lot of my colleagues seem to think.
I was just going to ask you, if the Steelers do a very Steeler thing and completely ignore offense in the first round.
Which they might. Like, for all we know,
Yeah,
the organizational philosophy is the only positions that are worth taking in the first round are quarterback and defense.
Yeah, and mostly linebacker.
Right.
If the Steelers do pass on offense, do you think, is cornerback really one of the guys you could get in the first round, or do you think there's other positions on defense where you could see a first-round pick?
There is, I guess, a school of thought that inside linebacker, and specifically this Zaven Collins from Tulsa, could be someone they've really taken a liking to. I've got my doubts about that for a couple reasons. One, I just don't think that position is as thin as some are making it out to be. I mean, they played Robert Spillane a ton last season, now mostly out of necessity, but even after Avery Williamson was brought into the fold, Spillane, despite his injury, was getting a ton of snaps, and they trusted him a lot in that postseason game, maybe incorrectly, but it still told me, kind of spoke volumes to how they feel about him. We'll see how that plays out. It's not like they gave him any money really this offseason, but they did bring Vince Williams back for cheap as well. So I just think the combination, at least, of those two is something that they can feel good about next to Devin Bush when they are in the base defense. As far as cornerback goes, you might have to reach for somebody at that spot because, there's all these question marks around Caleb Farley. Same thing with Greg Newsome from Northwestern. They're both injury risks, if you want to call them that. And even more so than that, guys, I also think when it comes to drafting a corner, they would rather get an inside slot type to replace Mike Hilton, because I think they gave Cam Sutton a new deal because they do want him to take Steven Nelson's spot on the outside.
Now, you mentioned that linebacker spot, specifically inside, but on the outside, of course, we who follow the Steelers know all about Alex Highsmith, his sky-high potential. But you kind of hear it nationally, like how some people view that being a hole for the Steelers. Of course, they do have a hole at outside linebacker, but as a backup, a primary backup spot. How important is it for the Steelers to fill that spot, and should they do it within one of their picks in the first 2 days?
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on how you view Cassius Marsh, which is like kind of a weird thing. But hey, we're in the weeds here on the night before the draft. We're talking number 3 outside linebacker, and unlike some other positions, such as, sixth man on the offensive line or backup safety, which I think is also, a question for the Steelers. That number 3 outside linebacker plays snaps just about every week, and they're meaningful snaps sometimes. I mean, how many drives have there been over the last couple years where you're like, why isn't TJ Watt or Bud Dupree in there? And why is the other team going down the field right now while they're on the sidelines? So you can't have any slouch in that position. And I know the Steelers were, I think, pretty thrilled with that Highsmith pick last year, one that wasn't necessarily like an A+ grade from those of us who do that sort of silly thing the day of the draft. But it seemed like he turned into a guy who was pretty reliable in that number 3 role, and then obviously eventually had to become the starter, and that was a little bit more up and down naturally. So I think they're pretty comfortable with him as the starter going into year 2, and they generally do expect their 3rd round or higher picks to be on that kind of trajectory. So, I think it's probably something you want to take a shot at least. in this draft, but I wouldn't do it before round 4 because, then you're bringing in a guy who you're investing a little less than you did in Alex Highsmith. And best case scenario, maybe he's much better than Cassius Marsh, and he's your new Chicolo/Ola Adeni.
Looking at the roster and different positions, which position would shock you the most if the Steelers picked it, say, in the first 4 rounds, like with one of the more valuable picks? Obviously
snapper.
they're
Colin Holba
Or punter.
But let's go between quarterback, wide receiver.
Yeah. Sorry, Geoffrey. I take things literally
safety.
Sometimes,
Yes. But which one would surprise you the most to see a valuable pick spent on?
Like defensive line. That's kind of like a not sexy pick, but they are really well stocked there. Quarterback of course would be a surprise to a degree, but there's arguments for continuing to try to take swings at that position. Wide receiver is kind of an interesting one. Like on paper, no need to draft another one, but the Steelers do it basically every year. They try to bring in someone who might be a good fit or can be the next AB or Emmanuel Sanders who you develop over time. And I think a factor there is also Matt Canada coming in, maybe first year as OC. He likes the guys that are on the roster at that spot, but you might want to handpick someone who he thinks can, help his scheme or vice versa. He can scheme some things for him. So maybe there's a specialist wide receiver out there. So while that would be, like I said, kind of a surprise just when you look at the roster itself, might not be that much of a shock just based on what they've done in the past at that position. And who knows? It's not like this wide receiver core is, completely bulletproof. Deontay Johnson has had his struggles. James Washington has disappeared for stretches, and Juju is back on a very low scale deal. But it's not like he's a guy who was all of a sudden taking that big leap in production last year that you hoped he would have.
Now, during Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin's press conference just the other day, one of the things Kevin Colbert mentioned during that press conference was that the Steelers don't really necessarily view themselves as a team that are in a position to trade up. They like their 8 picks, but he didn't necessarily shut that down completely. So to me, I kind of interpreted that if the right guy is there at the right spot, they might jump up. Specifically talking about Justin Fields, the quarterback, is kind of a polarizing name throughout this draft process because he's someone that could be viewed as the second pick, or like you mentioned, Chris Sims said he's the 32nd pick. Yeah. If he is in a position where it is potentially trade upable, I think we've probably all seen the clips of Mike Tomlin, Justin Fields, and their little bromance that's kind of budding. Could you see this team go in a direction where they try to chase their future quarterback of this team?
Hard to wrap my head around it, mainly because of what I think it would say about the way they view this, probably the last dance for Ben this year. I don't think we're breaking any ground by suggesting this is most likely his final ride, but it's a compelling discussion, no doubt. Like I did a point counterpoint piece on it for the Post-Gazette. I think it was last week, and you've got all these arguments, and that's exactly what draft speculation is, right? Like it's circular logic where you always have one person saying this, and that has to mean this thing. Whereas you could take the complete opposite stance and find plenty of examples to support your argument. So there would be, a lot of criticism, I suppose, if they did that, because you do have 4 quarterbacks on the roster right now. You've got a future Hall of Famer in Ben who, as long as he's healthy, he's going to play. You just used the 3rd rounder on a developmental potential successor a few years ago in Mason Rudolph. Has it panned out? Kind of hard to say, honestly, after what we saw the last couple years. And if they made that kind of big move, you'd also have a lot of people banging the drum for it being a great forward-thinking and progressive pick. So you've got the 49ers, like they're in a similar spot. They don't have Ben, but they've got Jimmy G. And all of a sudden they're going to draft a quarterback at 3. And are they going to try to be competitive right now with Garoppolo while also grooming a guy? You're almost wasting a year then at that point. But Then you look at someone like Patrick Mahomes. Nobody would say that was a wasted year for him learning as a rookie in Kansas City when you look at how it's turned out now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but just to bottom line it, still hard to fathom that situation for the Steelers tomorrow night. But another thing that's a cliche in this business, you never say never.
If you had a dream draft scenario for the Steelers for this draft to come out of like position groups that they've addressed or certain players that you really look at and say, wow, I want the Steelers to get that.
Sure.
What would your kind of ideal draft for the Steelers look like?
Well, I think, I am kind of a go running back this year guy. I know that's a little bit of a hot button topic. And, I don't necessarily think you're wrong if you're on one side or the other, because there's a lot of good reasoning for why you shouldn't go running back in round one. But I do think that's kind of what this particular team needs right now. And I just really like the two guys who are at the top of it. I like Travis Etienne slightly more. Maybe I'm biased because I used to cover Pitt football in the ACC, and seeing that guy run in person at the ACC championship game a few years ago, it's like he was literally shot out of a cannon that night in Charlotte. So I've loved him ever since then. The Steelers haven't had a running back like that in so long. It might be exactly what they need to get this running game from something, back up to respectable and not embarrassing. Beyond that, based on what I said earlier, it'd be really nice to get, I don't want to say a center in round two, because I also think you could have some scenarios where maybe someone who's an upgrade over BJ Finney and JC Hassenauer could be had in round three. I mean, Kevin Colbert was he was like almost sneakily laying the groundwork for that, talking about how this is an unusually deep class of centers is what he said. But he also said of those who can come in and play right away. So Spidey senses tingled a little bit when he said that. So I think if you could get, whether it's Dickerson, Creed, Humphrey, they'd probably have to be in the first two rounds. But I kind of like Josh Myers from Ohio State. He's a bigger body at center who I think could step in and do the job right away, and an impressive player and, one of those football character guys. And then beyond that, I'd like to see a corner, and I'd like to see someone who has a lot of the same skill sets as Mike Hilton. And the one that I feel like the Steelers are going to be drawn to, if it can work out, maybe even as high as the second round, is Asante Samuel Jr. from Florida State. They've already got Devin Bush Jr., and they've got, Cam Hayward, son of Ironhead, and Terrell Edmonds' dad played in the league. So they love guys like that with the bloodlines. And, watching a little bit of Samuel that I did, he really does remind me of Hilton. And I'm not going to say there would be no drop off, but I think you could, throw him in there day one, and maybe he could do that job for you pretty well.
So Geoffrey asked you the positive question. I guess I'll be the agent of chaos tonight. What is the worst case scenario? We're sitting here Sunday morning thinking, what the heck just happened? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, that's hard because, it's, they've got a first round pick again, like they didn't last year. So you're probably going to like that first guy. You're getting one of the top 25 players in the draft any way you slice it. So that's a plus. But I think if there is that, path where Najee Harris reunites with Tua in Miami at pick 18, and then right before you, the Jets say, how are you keeping us off the scoreboard if we have Zach Wilson and Travis Etienne leading a dynamic offense? So now if you're the Steelers, you're sitting there like, Javonte Williams, he runs hard, he finishes runs, but is he worth the 24th overall pick in the draft? Or, do we take one of these centers who, maybe they have a high floor, but the ceiling also isn't that high? Or do we take a chance on a tackle who might not even beat out Chuks Okorafor in year one? So, you can still find a way around that, maybe even go defense, as we kind of talked around earlier. But that to me would kind of be the one where you go back to the drawing board a little bit if you're them, and you say, are we going to be sitting here on Saturday night thinking, this wasn't that dynamic of a draft, and it's one where we don't feel like our outlook improved all that greatly.
Geoffrey, I'll give you the last question if you got anything else.
Do you have any draft crush mid-round or late-round guys that you think you look at and think, I want this guy on the Pittsburgh Steelers?
There was one guy who I'm not in love with his playing style necessarily or anything, but I just learned today that there's a cornerback from USC, Elijah Griffin, whose dad is Warren G, singer, rapper, Regulators. So he's also the stepbrother of Dr. Dre. So Dr. Dre is this guy's uncle. If you're just telling me all things being equal, Elijah Griffin, if he gets drafted by the Steelers, is going to bring like a Regulators concert at Heinz Field to open up a season one of these years, and maybe Dr. Dre pops out of nowhere. I'll sign in blood for that right now.
Oh, all of a sudden the in-stadium entertainment just takes off like a rocket. Like,
hey, they've already got Snoop among the famous fan base, so why not add a couple more West Coast legends?
Yeah, exactly. Brian, before we let you go, is there anything you want to plug?
Just check out post-gazette.com for our draft coverage over the next few days. We'll have a live chat on Thursday and Friday nights. Those usually get a whole lot of engagement, which can be fun but tiring for us at times. So it's always draft fever on those first and second nights. So that'll be enjoyable. And then Ray Fittipaldo and I will have a podcast. I think we'll probably do that Sunday morning after all the hay is in the barn, and we can go through what went right and what went wrong.
Awesome.
And of course, follow me on Twitter at Brian Batko if you want to see a whole lot of people yelling at me for Kyle Pitts, just saying he's a good player, basically.
Another day in the life of being internet famous, I suppose. But ladies and gentlemen, Brian Batko.
Engagement.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no problem. See you guys.
See you around.
See ya.
So for everyone listening on YouTube and Facebook right now, we will transition over to the second part of our show. So that just means you guys hang tight. For everyone listening on the podcast platform side, just click over to part 2 now. We will be back with some more great Steelers draft prep talk. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for the second part of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, joined by Geoffrey, Benedict, as always, hanging out, the dynamic duo. I suppose you can say. I think that's a pretty good nickname. But how you feeling? That was a pretty good interview with Brian Batko in the first part of the show.
Yeah, he was good. He was good. And I mean, you gotta love anytime we can get a different perspective, get a guy who is working the beat and actually, is around the team more than we get to be. That's a great thing.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that. But as we sit here right now, I think checking the clock, roughly the Steelers might just be a couple picks away from actually making their selections. So, as you sit here right now, are you feeling good? Are you feeling a little bit nervous? Or how do you feel about the pick in general?
I feel awful about the first round pick. I really do. I don't feel great about it.
I got to ask why. Why aren't you feeling great about this pick?
Okay. I don't think any of the running backs are worth a first round pick. I don't.
That's fair.
Yesterday I was looking through. I looked at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, went back to his film and was watching it. And in my opinion, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire was in this running back class, he'd be the number one back. And he went 32nd. And if you look at his rookie season, like he was a good rookie season. It was a very solid rookie season, but he's in Kansas City. You know what I mean? Like, he's in an ideal situation for his skill set to thrive. And I'm sitting there looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, if I think he's a better runner than the guys who are in this class, what we're going to ask of a running back that we take in the first round behind that offensive line, because you're not going to fully fix the offensive line if you're not starting in the first round. That's my opinion there too. You're going to have to rely on some BJ Finney probably early in the season. You're going to have to rely on Chuks Okorafor. You're not going to be able to get 2 mid-round guys and then start them week 1 and have it be an upgrade, right? You're just not going to be able to do that. So for me, I wonder if what fans think can happen with a first-round running back is really even reasonable to ask of one of these guys to come in with kind of a patched-together offensive line that right now isn't as good as it was last season when it sucked. As a run-blocking offensive line, it was legitimately terrible. 32nd in the league in rushing. And the offensive line was a serious part of that, And so now, is that even fair to ask of a rookie running back to come in and fix a run game that has a whole lot of problems?
Well, before we move on, then you mentioned the offensive line specifically. How many picks should they invest into that unit if they can try to turn the ship around?
I think they have to do too. I think you really you can get a tackle that's for the future, but you have to get, in my opinion, a week one starter at center is almost a necessity. BJ Finney was all right when he had a veteran crew that was awesome together, a veteran crew that worked amazingly well together all around him, and he was just the center, right? He was fine. But we don't know what David DeCastro has. We don't know what Kevin Dotson has. Dotson and Chuks Okorafor played together a little bit on the right side. Now we're talking about both of them moving to left side, right? There's a lot going on there. Banner played one game. He's played one game. And we're talking about him starting at right tackle, potentially. So for me, a BJ Finney in that situation is a very different ball game than where we saw BJ Finney before, where he even then he wasn't a great run blocker. He can hold his own in the passing game. He can keep Ben Roethlisberger, from getting killed, but he's not a run guy. So I don't have a lot of faith at all in the line currently established, even with the first round running back.
There's a few things in the live chat here I want to run through before I bring you a question. So we'll start off with this one from Andrew Wilbar. He posed a question to both of us. Towards me, he asked if the Steelers were to make a surprise pick at 24, who would it be? To quickly answer that, I would say, to me, I would be surprised if they went with the 6th quarterback out of the draft. That would be a big surprise. I'd say I like Kellen Mond the best out of that, but there aren't too many names that would genuinely surprise me. A quarterback, specifically the 6th quarterback at 24, would surprise me quite a lot, actually. And then the question Andrew posed to you, Geoffrey, how would you feel if the Steelers traded down?
I would love it. I was telling Michael Beck right before we came on the air that my dream scenario would be to have just an absolute ton of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks. I love so many players in this draft that are going to be taken in the 3rd round, a couple of 2nd round guys. I would love a trade back, anything like that. But I'm a firm believer in looking at the Steelers and what they do. I'm also a firm believer that the Steelers are not afraid to tell people what they do. They will tell you how they operate, and they don't care if you know. And Kevin Colbert just said recently in a press conference, if they trade back, he needs to have, if they're going to trade back 10 spots, he needs to have 10 guys he's okay taking before he'll be willing to trade back 10 spots, so that you never run into a situation where you traded back and now you don't get someone worth that pick, right? So basically you gave up in that mind, let's say they trade back and they pick up an extra 3rd round pick. You don't trade your 1st round pick for a 3rd round pick. And if you don't get a guy worth that 1st round pick by trading back, then that's pretty much what you did. You gave up a very valuable pick for 2 much less valuable picks. The only reason it makes sense to pick up a later round pick is if you are going to still get a guy that you want. So I'd love for the Steelers to trade back, but I don't think it would be very far. I don't think you'd see them trade back much past the very beginning of the 2nd round. But I would love it. I would absolutely love it if they traded back.
This super chat comes in from Sean Manahan saying, we forget the biggest problem in the run game was they stopped playing Dotson for whatever reason. Do you think Kevin Dotson alone is the answer to fixing the Steelers' run blocking woes?
I've got one problem there. I loved Kevin Dotson. If you guys saw my film rooms, I did. Huge fan of Kevin Dotson. But I will again say, it wasn't just Dotson. It was Kevin Dotson and Marquise Pouncey. Marquise Pouncey looked so much better when he was playing next to Kevin Dotson. And in my opinion, it's because Kevin Dotson is kind of that Florida Gator offensive line guy. You know, when Marquise Pouncey and Mike Pouncey were getting Tim Tebow national championships and Heisman Trophy, you know, candidacies, when they were doing that for Tim Tebow, they were just beastly. They were incredible. And when Marquise Pouncey was next to Kevin Dotson, they kind of had that going on. They were really, really good together. And I'm a firm believer in Kevin Dotson, but you're going to have a center with him. You're going to have somebody with him. That's one of the reasons I think center is really important, is because you're going to have a Kevin Dotson. You're going to need that center. Kevin Dotson cannot carry a center yet. We saw it when he was in and J.C. Hassenauer was in. The line was awful. The line was absolutely terrible. Despite the fact that he was playing, the line was just bad. So for me, it's not just Dotson. Dotson does need someone who, I mean, Marquise Pouncey could tell him exactly what to do. You know, Dotson, he could keep things simple for Dotson and be right there and be like, hey, dude, you know, this is what we're doing. He had that guy right next to him. He doesn't have that this year, and that's I have a little concern with that, but I'm a huge fan of Kevin Dotson.
Now, one of my draft crushes is something we'll dive into a little bit more. Josh Myers. He could potentially be that guy because, like Kevin Colbert said, they think there's a lot of centers that could come in and start on day one. To me, Josh Myers is probably the fourth center on your board in some sort of order of Landon Dickerson, Creed Humphrey, Quinn Miners, and then Josh Myers. There's another block after that, but 4 centers being able to start right away, I think that's kind of what it screams to me. But Josh Myers being one of my draft crushes, and one of the things we really want to get into tonight was our draft crushes in general. So, Geoffrey, I'm curious some of the names at the top of your list that you really want the Steelers to add to this roster.
Well, number one for me is Creed Humphrey. He is an athletic freak. He runs outside zone so well that he would really help open up that Matt Canada offense and really let him get the most out of a guy like an Anthony McFarland. And I think Benny Snell, too. Benny Snell, people think he's a power back, but really he does his best in those outside zone plays where the defense is moving laterally and he can crash into him with a head of steam. That's where he really does well. So I'm a big fan of Creed Humphrey. I'm also a fan of Josh Myers. I like him, but he's a completely different offensive line. He makes your line completely different. At that point, you are a straight ahead vertical running team. You're an inside zone and man blocking scheme. But I do like him. You want me to keep going? You want me to keep going with a couple more?
Yeah, rattle off a couple more.
Okay, a guy we talked about when we had Notre Dame, when we were doing Notre Dame here, is Tommy Tremble. For an H-back, he'd be your inline blocking tight end and allow Eric Ebron to move around. And you could also put Ebron on the line and put him at H-back and move him all around. I think he is an untapped player. He's not the most polished, but in a Matt Canada offense and that kind of style, you don't really need to be as polished. You need to be able to catch the ball when it's your time. You need to be able to block, and you need to be able to move. And Tremble can do all of that, and I think he would really unlock some of Canada's stuff. Another one, inside linebacker we talked about at Ohio State. This is one of my 3rd or 4th round kind of guys, is Pete Werner. We talk about Zaven Collins, but I do agree that 1st round pick at linebacker is kind of iffy now. Like they've said, those kind of athletic linebackers, they're all over the place now. It's not like Ryan Shazier. Ryan Shazier was kind of a unicorn when he came out. He was an elite athlete, and everyone's like, whoa, this is crazy. You don't see linebackers like this guy. Now you do. And one of my guys is Pete Werner, who tested really, really great at the combine. He's an incredible athlete, and he's more of a run stuffer. Like, he's like Vince Williams, but he's a freakish athlete. And so I absolutely love him, and we could get him in a mid-round. So he's another one of my draft crushes. I'll get over to you, Michael, and let you give us a couple.
A couple names that jump out immediately to me are some offensive linemen that can play all 5 spots across the offensive line. The more higher ranked and someone that's starting to get some first round draft buzz, Dylan Radins, the tackle specifically /guard/center out of North Dakota State. He's someone who's able to do it all. And then another school that we did break down, Notre Dame, Robert Hainsey. He's a guy that can also do that. And both of those guys have fairly long arms, which I know probably doesn't mean too much to people that haven't played the position or don't really realize the kind of added benefit it would be to have long arms. As someone with short arms, being an offensive lineman in my day, it was an issue guys had to overcome. But this is a draft class that is noted for not having a lot of guys that have arms measuring 34 inches in length. And both of those guys are guys that exceed that. And I know that's one of the reasons why Radins is shooting up the draft board. It's one of those things that you just can't teach size. You can't teach length. Those two, Alex Leatherwood, who's developed kind of more to be a second/third day pick. He's also someone that physically his statistics measured out of the gym. He just doesn't compare to everyone else because he's so freakishly big, so freakishly long. Those are 3 offensive linemen I could really get behind as some developmental pieces and guys that can play multiple positions. Outside of that, Geoffrey, I'm curious, do you have a first round draft crush where you're like, man, I want this guy and I want him bad?
Yeah, at this point, I'm kind of settled on Creed Humphrey, who I don't think is really a 124 guy. Like, to me, the second round, like in this draft, the second round caliber guys start early. So to me, like at picking at 24, we're most likely going to get a second round guy, which is why I've said, like, I'd be fine. Like if Justin Fields falls to, like, say 14, right before the Patriots, if the Steelers traded to get a Justin Fields in that situation, I'd be like, you know what, go for it. Because there's not a lot of first round talent in this draft class, in my view. I know some people look at it and say, whoa, there's crazy amounts of talent out there. I don't agree. In my opinion, it's not that great. So for me, a first round pick would be Justin Fields falls and the Steelers actually go out and get him. I think he fits the mold of a Lamar Jackson. He's a guy that you're going to have to scheme something that he fits well. But unlike Lamar Jackson, he has a cannon of an arm.
Huge.
And so for me, you've got a guy who needs a more college-based offense with more motion, more stuff, coming to a team with, Matt Canada, like the perfect guy to get that kind of quarterback. Also, he has a freakish cannon of an arm. He's got a great deep ball. And yeah, Chase Claypool happens to be one of his wide receivers. So for me, Justin Fields would be an amazing first-round grab for the Steelers. I don't think he rates as high. If you're just looking at quarterback potential to fit in all kinds of different systems, Justin Fields isn't your guy. You know what? Trevor Lawrence is that dude. Trey Lance is probably better at being that. But if you can design the offense to fit his skills and do a more college-ish offense like Baltimore did with Lamar Jackson, but that fits Justin Fields, I think he can be that Lamar Jackson type character. And I think Pittsburgh is like the perfect spot for him.
BTSC co-editor Dave Schofield chimes in the live chat here. He says, I said that as well. 15 or 16 true first rounders. You hear that a lot too. It's not just like a hot take that there's not these crazy amounts of talent just oozing high-end first-round potential. It's something you kind of seen a lot throughout this entire draft process. Now, if someone falls that has one of those grades, but say is a wide receiver or a position the Steelers don't really need, would they still like snub that spot to take more of a position of need? Like if Jalen Waddle is there at 24 and it's between Waddle and Najee Harris and Creed Humphrey, What do you, because genuinely, like, the top talent it would be Jalen Waddle, but that wouldn't make any sense really, or too much sense in my opinion. But I'm curious what you would do if that is the scenario you're faced.
Forget making sense. If Jalen Waddle's there at 24, you take Jalen Waddle. You say, Ben, look what we got you. Like, hey, Ben, we got you a pony. Right?
Ben would sign a new deal, I'm guessing. Yeah.
You're going to have to throw within 2 seconds. We accept that. Like, you're going to have to throw the ball as soon as it touches your hands. But we've got a guy who can take a 2-yard pass and break it to the house. You know, and right now we've got a guy like Deontay Johnson who can take a short pass, and if he doesn't drop it, get you 20 yards. But at the same point, like a Jalen Waddle, man, shoot, I would take a Jalen, especially Matt Canada. Matt Canada would find ways to get him open. Jalen Waddle would be doing crazy stuff in Matt Canada's offense, and Ben would find him. So, yeah, if Jalen Waddle were to fall, yeah, take him. One of my strategies, and even like the Zaven Collins pick now, if the Steelers picked Zaven Collins in the first round, does it make sense when you look at the depth chart? No. Does it maybe solve a weakness we have? No. It doesn't solve a weakness we have. But you know what it does? It takes an area that we're okay and it turns it into something that other teams sit there and have to go like, oh, crap. How do we deal with Zaven Collins and Devin Bush? You know, Jalen Waddle would be like, all right, their number 3/4 receiver is Jalen Waddle. Like, how do you defend the Pittsburgh Steelers in that situation when they go 5 wide, right? And it's Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, James Washington, Jalen Waddle. You could run your offense that way. Just be like, we've got 5 wide receivers. You can't cover 4 of them. Like, so there's no way you can cover all 5. Ben, we're doing empty set all day. Just go for it. Like, doesn't matter. We don't need a running back. We'll find some guy who all he can do is pass block. You know, at that point, BJ Finney and BJ Finney and Chuck Okorafor are fine. They're pass blockers. They can't run block. Who cares? We don't need to run.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Like, you can't pass on talent. And that's one of the big things I think we've tried to hammer home this kind of off season. And throughout this entire process, we've talked to a bunch of schools. I'm curious if there's one that sticks out to you. One of our interview guests that you're like, I really learned a lot that week.
Probably Oklahoma State. I had the least information on them. And I was not big into Tevin Jenkins. And I cannot remember who came on, what her name was. But after that interview, I had to go look up Tevin Jenkins. And I was like, wow. You know, this dude is crazy. He's a tough first-round pick, but I really love his game. He's a tough first-round pick because, in my opinion, he's iffy if he cannot be a left tackle. He's not going to be a left tackle. We have a right tackle, you know, and it's possible he could end up a guard. I don't know. So that was a big one to me. That was a really good class I learned from. I also really enjoyed our Ohio State one just because even prepping for that one, I was like, wow, there's a lot of good fits for the Steelers on Ohio State's offense. Even a guy I like, we don't need a guard, right? But Wyatt Davis, holy crap. You put him and Kevin Dotson together, you'd have like the beastiest line ever. You'd be like, we get Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis. Our internal line the interior line with them and Kevin Dotson would just be like, it'd just be ridiculous. You could, like, I think I said in our Slack channel, you could put Jordan Berry at running back and it would work at that point. You know, like it wouldn't matter. Like they're just going to crush people.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought for sure you're going to take the easy route and be like, JT O'Sullivan, QB school, whatever, you know.
No, I seriously watch everything he makes. There was nothing in that interview that surprised me.
Fair enough.
I watched literally everything he comes. I'll be like, this last week, I was like, oh, crap, you came out with another video? And this one's 30 minutes long? I don't even have time to watch this, and I'm sitting there watching it.
Sorry, kids. Take yourself to school, whatever.
Yeah, walk to school. You'll get there eventually.
Speaking of quarterbacks, though, and before we run out of time tonight, what do you think of a second-round quarterback? I know a lot of fans will hate it, but right now, I know the kind of talk growing is there's 3 guys that could potentially be second-round picks. We know Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond, Davis Mills. What would your thoughts be if 55 the Steelers take one of those guys?
Oh, if they take Kyle Trask,
Or
I would not
even
be
the
okay
best
with
of those 3. Like what would your feelings be?
You know what? I like Kellen Mond, but as a developmental guy, I would rank him lower than Dwayne Haskins. And I don't think the Steelers are moving on from Mason Rudolph. Whoever you take there has to compete, right? And look at what they're up against. I think there's a good chance whoever you get there, you're kind of taking them just because they're a second-round pick. But are you cutting Dwayne Haskins? Like, what if Dwayne Haskins comes out and actually looks good? Are you cutting Mason Rudolph? Like, Mason Rudolph is your backup. That's your guy who knows the system. He knows the players. Are you going with 2 fresh faces in the room to be Ben's backup? Like, to me, I don't think that's worth it. I think you keep what we have. And I think you keep Josh Dobbs and he ends up on the practice squad just so he can be there to talk to Ben Roethlisberger and be like, hey, Ben, this is what I saw on film. Like, I could see that happening. I just, if the quarterback isn't like surefire better than Mason Rudolph this year, like a Justin Fields would be, like a Trey Lance would be, then I don't see the value in taking them because, like, why? Why do you have them? Unless you really think no quarterback in the next 3 years is going to be their equal. Otherwise, like, yeah, I wouldn't do it.
This is something we asked Brian before he logged off in the first part of our show, but what's your dream draft scenario here?
My dream draft scenario?
Your dream draft scenario.
Oh, my dream draft scenario is Creed Humphrey, round 1. Someone like an Eichenberg or a Jalen Mayfield fall in round 2, or we get a tackle and we get a center. Then I want Michael Carter, running back from North Carolina. I love his film. I know that's not a take that a lot of people share. I think him and Benny Snell would make a great, tag team of running backs with Benny Snell being grinding out yards and Michael Carter breaking big ones. I want Tommy Tremble in there. But really, oh, sorry. That was
it's okay.
Disgusting. I got something in my mouth. That was weird. Anyways,
can't all be perfect shows, folks.
It was like I don't know. It might have been a bug. It was something weird just came in my mouth. That was gross.
We have fun.
One of my actual real dream, right? My real dream is like UDFA territory, undrafted free agent territory, end of the draft guys. I've got 3 guys I want on the Pittsburgh Steelers that may not even be drafted. One Duffy. Is my man from Michigan, Ben Mason, the fullback, the human missile. Whether he has the ball or not, he goes full speed and hits who's ever in front of him as hard as he possibly can. Steelers fans would love it because he'll drive anyone forward. And then 2 players from Pitt. I want Jason Pinnock, right, from Pitt, who tested off the charts. He was actually a good cornerback on film. And people were like, he's going to go undrafted. And that actually surprises me. Like, I was picturing him as like a 5th or a 6th round pick just because he was a number 1 cornerback in a tough division for covering wide receivers. And he did pretty dang good. And then he tests off the charts and people were like, yeah, he's going to go undrafted. And I'm like, what? No, bring him in. Like, really, Mike Tomlin, Kevin Colbert, if you want these cornerbacks that are 6 foot tall and athletic freaks that are developmental corners, stop picking them in the 1st round. Stop picking them in the 3rd round. Take them as undrafted free agents. Take them in the 6th or 7th round, and no one cares. No one complains about Terry Hawthorne. Nobody. He was a 5th round pick. No one cares. You can take whatever you want there. We don't care. So Jason Pinnock is a guy I want. And the other one is the man with the face of a toddler and the biceps of angry Bruce Banner, Jalen Twyman. That dude, I want him on the Steelers. He tested like in the cellar athletically, except for his bench press.
40 reps.
And like he's been out of school. He's been off the field for a year, put on weight, his agility, like everything went to crap. But the season he was there, he looked like, like a poor man's Aaron Donald. Give me that dude. Put him in there. I want that guy on the Steelers. He's a late round pick. That's our defensive line guy. Give him a time. Let him stand on the sidelines and flex at Isaiah Buggs and push people around. Like
sideline
I'm
fights.
fine with that. Yeah, like go do that. That's what I want. You'll see everyone. If you guys already don't know this about me, that's my favorite part of the season is when we get the undrafted free agents. The rookie camp occurs. Those are my guys. The Devlin Hodges of the world. Those are my dudes. I love those guys. Those are the guys I cheer for. So that's my real goal. Is those three guys as Steelers. I won't even care what the first round pick was.
We're gonna go over tonight. Sorry, Brian. It's our draft spectacular. I got some stuff I need to get through here, and I want to talk about my dream scenario too.
Yeah, go for it.
I think in the perfect world, the Steelers are able to trade back, whether or not that's with Green Bay or Buffalo or Tampa Bay. Those are probably the three teams they do it for. There's no way the Steelers are trading out of the first round. That would blow my mind. They legitimately need to have like a dozen names where they're like, oh, we love all these guys. And that's not reasonable. They trade back, say 5-6 spots. They add a third round pick and still have, say, Zaven Collins or Najee Harris fall their lap. To me, you know how much I love Zaven Collins. So that's the direction I go with that. The second round, if Javonte Williams falls down the board, I am on board for trading back in the first to trade up in the second to get one of the top three running backs and still one of the best players available with your first round pick. All of a sudden, you have outstanding linebacker depth. You got the running back that you desperately need, and you still have 2 third-round picks and potentially 2 fourth-round picks if you didn't have to move one up, depending on the trade scenarios. But with 2 third-round picks, you can find your center in Josh Myers, and you can also pick up a tackle in, say, Stone Forsythe. All of a sudden, your offensive line is looking pretty good. You got good depth on your offensive line. You got your running back. You got this baller on the defensive side that can play both linebacker spots. And then in the fourth round, you could go get Sean Wade out of Ohio State. Now you have a nickel. Sure, when you look at it, you might think to yourself, oh, they still need a tight end. But really, one spot is probably going to have to suffer here. Like, no matter how you slice it, something is going to have to take some sort of a step back. And to be honest, there's still a bunch of options when it comes to tight ends in free agency and even via trade. The Steelers still have Eric Ebron on the roster, and all they really need to do is add some kind of blocking type tight end too, or just somebody else to the mix that has some sort of experience. There are those guys in free agency, so I can see it happening. So now that I got that off my chest, what do you, Geoffrey Benedict, think the Steelers will do? What the Steelers will do, not you do, what the Steelers will do with their 24th overall pick?
Oh, I honestly think they end up with Najee Harris, or if not him, another running back. I find it hard to believe that 3 running backs are going to be taken in the first round.
Me too.
Frankly, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is better than any of them, in my opinion, at least. I have a hard time with that. I understand Harris possibly going to Miami if it's your second pick, but at 18, you could get a really good player still. Like, there's still going to be a lot of good players out there. I have trouble with running back.
I could like I can agree with that, with running back being the 24th pick. What the Steelers actually do, Najee Harris, I can see that. I can also see what happened last year happening, where they all slide like 30 slots longer than they were kind of expected to go. I can definitely see that happening as well. And one of those backs being available at 55, I feel like that should happen. Like, to me, I think everyone would kind of go a little crazy if all those running backs are gone. That just means people got insanely trigger happy at the spot. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I feel like one should be there at 55. If Harris is gone, or if you lean on the belief that a running back will be there at 55, I think they probably try to address the offensive line. Of course, there's those Zaven Collins rumors that just won't go away. despite me not being the one that's starting these fires. So don't point the messenger. But what I genuinely I think they will do Najee Harris. Like if I was a betting man, if I had to put money on it, that's the name I'm putting the money on. But really, as we sit here right now, this whole process, the whole time I've been asking you, is it any clear? Really, it's just as murky as ever. And it has to do with the prospects, has to do with the Steelers themselves and what they bring in. Really, we just don't know. Now, since we are past the top of the hour, I want to make sure if you have any closing thoughts or anything you want to plug, speak now, because next time you hear from us, we'll be breaking down draft picks.
Yeah, really, all I got to plug is stay with us. We are going to hit the draft hard this next week. I've already got permission from my wife. My next week is pretty much just draft focused. Michael and I are going to be on the air on Saturday for the 4th round. I'm doing
both picks.
Daily. Yeah, I'm doing daily stock reports after the picks each day of the draft. I'm going to be breaking down scouting reports, of the picks we make, going through different websites, different people, and what they said about each of these picks. And then Kevin Smith and I are going to be doing film rooms. Everyone's going to be doing. That's the stuff I know I'm involved in. I haven't even kept track of what other people are doing. I know Michael's got a ton of stuff he's going to be doing. It's going to be crazy. You're going to get all the draft content you could possibly want from behind the steel curtain, both in podcast, live on YouTube, and in the written form. It's going to be absolutely insane. It's going to be great. It's the most coverage we've ever had.
I'm going to double down on what Geoffrey's saying here. Make sure wherever you get your podcast from, you are subscribed to our channels. Dave Schofield, co-editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, is bringing you instant analysis, 10-minute podcasts on every single pick. You are getting instant analysis on those players. About 5 minutes after every single pick is made, we are doing live roundtables on those picks. We're getting player tweet reactions. We're getting fan reaction. Seriously, a ton of content is coming at you. If you want it first, links will continually be provided to you by following us on our social media channels. So make sure you're following us on Twitter, Facebook, and even on Instagram. You can find us at Behind the Steel Curtain or BT Steel Curtain on Twitter and Instagram, those being our handles. You can find us, follow. I'm telling you, there's a ton of content. If you love the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you love the draft, if you want this content, seriously, you're not getting better content or more content anywhere else. And best yet for you guys, 100% free. No paywalls. Seriously, what is there not to love about BehindTheSteelCurtain.com? Got that off my chest. So make sure you're following along, hitting the subscribe button, 5 stars. Everything you can do to help support our channel and learn more about these draft picks helps support us. So just make sure you're doing it. So, ladies and gentlemen, for my co-host, Geoffrey Benedict, my name is Michael Beck. The draft is tomorrow, baby. Can't wait. We'll talk to you guys soon.